Hello again. This is going to be chapter 14 of Charlotte's Web, and the chapter's called Dr. Dorian. Let's find out more about who Dr. Dorian is. The next day was Saturday. Fern stood at the kitchen sink, drying the breakfast dishes as her mother was washing them. Mrs. Arable worked silently. She hoped Fern would go out to play with other children instead of heading off to the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch animals. "Charlotte is the best storyteller I've heard," said Fern, poking her dish towel into the corner of a cereal bowl. "Fern," said her mother sternly, "you must not invent things. You know spiders don't tell stories. Spiders can't talk." "Charlotte can," replied Fern. "She doesn't talk very loud, but she talks." "What kind of story did she tell?" asked Mrs. Arable. "Well," began Fern, "she told me about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in a web. Don't you think that's fascinating?" "Fern, dear, how would a fish get caught in a spider's web?" said Mrs. Arable. "You know it couldn't happen, and you're making this up." "Oh, it happened all right," replied Fern. "Charlotte, she never fibs. This cousin of hers built a web across the stream. One day she was hanging around in a web, and a tiny fish leaped into the air and got tangled. The fish was caught by one fin, Mother. Its tail was wildly thrashing and shining in the sun. Can't you just see the web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept slipping in, dodging out. She was beaten mercilessly over the head by the wildly thrashing fish, dancing in, dancing out." "Fern," snapped her mother, quite cross, "Stop it. Stop it inventing these wild tales." "But I'm not inventing," said Fern. "I'm just telling you facts." "What did finally happen?" asked her mother, now overcome by curiosity. "Well, Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, then ate him when she was good and ready. Spiders have to eat, you know, same as the rest of us." "I suppose they do," said Mrs. Arable, rather vaguely. "Charlotte has another cousin who's a balloonist. She stands on her head, lets out a lot of line, and is carried aloft by the wind. Mother, wouldn't you simply love to do that?" "Yes, I would, come to think of it," replied Mrs. Arable. "But Fern, darling, I wish you would play outdoors instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates and do something nice. You're spending too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much." "Alone?" said Fern. "Alone? My best friends are in the barn cellar. It's a very sociable place. It's not at all lonely." Now Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road to the Zuckermans. Her mother dusted the sitting room, and as she worked, she was still thinking about Fern. It didn't seem natural for a little girl to be so interested in these animals. Finally, Mrs. Arable decided she would make a call to old Dr. Dorian and ask his advice. She got in the car, drove to his office in the village. Now, Dr. Dorian was a man with a thick beard. He was glad to see Mrs. Arable and gave her a comfortable chair. "It's about Fern," she explained. "Fern spends entirely too much time in the Zuckerman's barn. It does not seem normal. She sits on a milk stool in the corner of the barn cellar near the pig pen, and she watches animals hour after hour. She just sits and listens." Dr. Dorian leaned back in his chair and he closed his eyes. "Oh, how enchanting," he said. "It must be real nice and quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, doesn't he?" "Well, yes," said Mrs. Arable, "but it all started with a pig. We let Fern raise it on a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern has been going to her uncle's to be near it." "I've been hearing things about this pig," said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he's quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that have appeared in the spider's web? Asked Mrs. Arable nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Well, do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Arable. Understand what? Said the doctor. Well, do you understand how they could be writing in a spider's web? Oh, no, said Dr. Dorian. I don't understand that bit one bit. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said it was a miracle, but nobody pointed out that the web itself is a miracle. What's miraculous about a spider's web? Said Mrs. Arable. I don't see why you say a web is a miracle. It's just a web. Have you ever tried to spin one? Asked Dr. Dorian. Mrs. Arable shifted a little bit uneasily in her chair. Well, no, she said. But I can crochet a dolly, and I can knit a sock. Sure, said the doctor, 'cause someone showed you, right? Yes, my mother taught me. Well, who taught a spider? A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instructions from anybody, explained the doctor. Don't you regard that as a miracle? It's a really interesting point. You can picture the scene here. We've got Mrs. Arable, perhaps shifting uncomfortably in her seat, and old Dr. Dorian there. So you can imagine the scene. She's gone to her family doctor to talk about how she thinks Charlotte's got a bit of a problem. But Dr. Dorian, he doesn't seem so worried at this stage, does he? Let's carry on with the story. So Dr. Dorian has just asked whether the web is a bit of a miracle. Well, I suppose so, said Mrs. Arable. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I don't understand how these words got onto the web. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. Well, none of us do, said Dr. Dorian, sighing. I'm a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything, but I don't understand everything, and I don't intend to let it worry me. Mrs. Arable fidgeted. Fern said the animals talk to each other. Dr. Dorian, do you believe animals can talk? Well, I've never heard one say anything, he replied, but it does prove nothing. It's quite possible that an animal has spoken civilly to me, and I didn't catch that remark because I wasn't paying attention. Children do pay far more attention than grown-ups. If Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barn talk, I'm quite ready to believe her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers. I can give you my word on that. Now, you might not know what the word incessant means, but hopefully in that sentence, when you think about what Dr. Dorian has said just beforehand, you can work out what incessant means. It means to go on and on and on and on. Like today, the rain is incessant. It's been coming down for hours. Let's carry on with the story. Well, I do feel better about Fern now, said Mrs. Arable. You don't think I need to worry about her? Does she look well? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes. Her appetite good? Oh, yes, she's always hungry. Does she sleep well at night? Yes. Then don't worry, said the doctor. Do you think she'll ever start thinking about anything other than pigs and sheep and geese and spiders? How old is Fern? She's 8. Well, said Dr. Dorian, I think she will always love animals, but I doubt that she will spend her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys? Well, she knows Henry Fussy, said Mrs. Arable brightly. Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went into a deep thought. Henry Fussy, he mumbled to himself. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I would say offhand that spiders and pigs were fully as interesting as Henry Fussy. Yes, I predict that the day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that captures Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. How is Avery? He asked, opening his eyes wide. Oh, Avery, chuckled Mrs. Arable. Avery is always fine. Of course he gets into poison ivy and gets stung by wasps and bees, and he brings frogs and snakes home, and he breaks everything he lays his hands on, but he's fine. Good, said the doctor. Mrs. Arable said goodbye and thanked Dr. Dorian very much for his advice. She felt greatly relieved. And at that point we get to the end of that chapter. So I'm not sure Dr. Dorian's visit did a great deal of good for Mrs. Arable, but it did open her eyes to a few important facts, how children's interests change from year to year. I'll be doing chapter 15, it's called The Crickets, in the next video. I want you to have a little think about what Dr. Dorian said and whether you agree with him. Do you think that animals talk, but that adults just don't listen? I'll leave that one with you. Bye for now.